Okay, welcome all on Play Chess and YouTube live streaming. So let's see, this week I've played in a Blitz tournament myself last night, a 12-rounder. I'm a bit shattered today actually. I had to play Bogdan Lalic in the last round, 2 games each, 6 rounds, and he slaughtered me, to be honest, in the last 2 rounds. I played a Banco Gambit in the first game, and he just held on to the pawn and just stormed down the queen side. And I played a Trompovsky with h4 in the second game, and he just won my b2 pawn, and I managed to blunder my rook. So why do we play Blitz? Well, Blitz is often being used, or rapid, as a kind of tie-breaking sometimes in very serious tournaments, but I think it's a very entertaining form of the game, which I've always enjoyed. I think since the 1990s, I even went, sometimes quite far to play even in chess cafes, just Blitz chess. So it's been an enjoyable thing for me. More recently, I've always wanted to be good also at any time control, basically. So I think it's interesting to look at the Norway chess tournaments. It's great that they held a Blitz tournament. Some of the greatest chess players in history, like Tao, Fischer, Kasparov, they were able to win the Blitz tournaments of their time. So I think there is somehow some correlation between a certain amount of Blitz ability and strength on longer games. So Magnus Carlsen has been very strong on all the different time controls, and so has, of course, Fischer and let's see. So in this Blitz tournament, one of the shorter games, which has been shown on the channel, we'll just review that. This is really good for if you go to a tournament and want to show a Magnus Carlsen game. This is probably the easiest one to remember. It was against Caruana as well, a very high-profile opponent, the #1 Italian. So d4. I'm sure most of you have seen this by now, if it was on my channel or on Play Chess. I'm not sure if you've all seen it here. But Caruana played e6, inviting an Nimzo-Indian. So if c4, we might have bishop b4 or knight f6. But we get a transposition into a French defense. Magnus chooses knight d2, the Tarrasch. And this move is trying for an active game, c5. Magnus just responds with knight gf3. It was taken. Knight takes d4, knight f6. Now Magnus plays e takes d5. Unless black doesn't really want the isolated queen's pawn with e takes. I think on Livebook, if I can connect to Livebook, knight takes has been played, but queen takes d5 is the most popular move. So knight b5, threatening knight c7 check. And black usually responds to knight a6 with knight a6. In fact, I did actually go over this game with Bogdan Lalic and Paul Georgiou last night. Some interesting variation on this, that if black actually had played queen d8, I think it can get a little bit tricky with knight c4. This knight c4 hitting the d6 square could leave white with a very comfortable position, even if the queens get exchanged off. So it's a very interesting line here. I wonder what the engine actually thinks about this. If I just add a bit on this position, it's supposed to be slightly better for white. If taking this is just slightly better for white. So maybe that's why knight a6 was chosen. It's the main move here for black, to play knight a6. Now, after knight c3, queen d8, a bit of insight from Grandmaster Bogdan Lalic from yesterday. If queen f3, the problem is black in this position has a very strong move. And this is not something I mentioned actually in the video. White wants to play queen f3 because it does stop the development of this bishop on this diagonal so easily. But the problem here, the observant of you, let's have a bit of a quiz here. What would you play with black? It's a very, very strong move black has in this position. If I give you 20 seconds, what would you play here with black? So if you had the black pieces in this position, what would you play here? Any ideas? Any ideas for black? What would you play with black? So this didn't happen in the game. I'm just saying a what if, just to make sure this variation is covered actually. So Queen F3, it's a good move in principle, because it will try and disrupt black's development of this bishop in particular. But black has a great move in this position. Yeah, okay, on play chess it's been mentioned. I'm hoping you're all guessing. Knight b4 is actually really annoying. Because what do we do about c2? It's a real pain. The queen basically has to go back, you know, to d1. If bishop d3, this is just, well, black's just better with just taking here. This would be very nice. So that's why I think a3 is the best move, and you know, the most played move. It just deprives that knight b4. So white does actually want to play queen f3. So bishop e7, queen f3, and black. The main move is knight c7, but black actually castled. And I hope most of you have seen this game. If you haven't, where have you been? This is the most. have you not been on the channel recently? So what does white play here? I'm sure most of you have seen this, but just in case, because this actually finished the game now, you can work it out. There's something wrong with just castling here. So you've got it. On play chess, if you step away from the notation tab, by the way, to make sure we can do these guess the move quizzes. Yeah, so I guess you've all seen it anyway. So I'm going to say now. So the queen actually wasn't just centralizing the queen across and positionally, it was actually tactical as well. So this was just winning a piece, and Caruana resigned. So yeah, an epic miniature, really. So anyway, let's go on to some other interesting games from that Blitz tournament that I want to go over tonight, so that makes tonight interesting. So Peters Vidler with the white pieces against Magnus Carlsen. This is a much more involved battle. So let's take Magnus's perspective, the black side. So c4, Magnus plays g6, e4. No, white by playing this is already weakening the d4 square, and Magnus strikes at d4. He marks out the d4 square with e5, d4, and a very interesting move in this position. And I think actually the most common move is actually to play d6 according to live book. Magnus chooses the second most common, which is knight f6. So it's already it's looking it's an interesting idea, just hitting e4, letting e5 drop. Knight f3 was played here. If d takes e5, knight takes e4, this is okay for black. Maybe even more than okay for black. Black's even got a threat now, bishop c5. If white's not careful. So white played knight f3, and now e takes d4, e5. So it's very unusual. Well, for me, it's a very unusual opening position. So queen takes d4, check. Knight bd2. So did Magnus get a great position so far from this opening? It looks a bit on the strange side, because the bishop, with these weakened squares, you'd think the bishop would want to be around here, but knight takes d2, bishop takes, knight c6, hitting the queen. The bishop actually exchanges off, queen takes, queen e7. Now the thing is, the clever thing about this is that black doesn't have to castle kingside. In fact, after castling queenside, Magnus prepares to basically castle queenside, b6. So he's going to get this bit out of the way and try and castle queenside. It looks like a very interesting opening position indeed in this game. So bishop d3, bishop b7, bishop e4, pinning the knight. Black castles queenside. Okay, rook he1. So now Magnus plays f6, hitting white's most advanced pawn. E takes, queen takes. It seems a pleasant enough position for black so far. The engine suggests small advantage for white still. Queen g5. Magnus avoids the trade of queens, just keeping the queen on this diagonal. h4. It looks as though h5 could be good, putting g6 under the pressure. Rook he8. Ignoring h5 actually. h5 is played. So this pin, is it annoying? How annoying is this? Well, in this position now, this might actually be a slight mistake, believe it or not, this h5. It's what Magnus was tempting here. It looks as though the bishop might be slightly sensitive, and maybe white should have played king b1 apparently. So we're going to see why now. After h5, black has knight b4. So hitting the bishop, hitting a2. White takes on b7, king takes. So we've still got a2 as an idea. White now takes on e8, takes, and here it's tricky for white because there's also queen f7 could target c4 and just maybe take this next move. White actually retreated with queen d2, hitting the knight. If the knight took on here, I think it just gets stranded actually, king b1. And what are we doing about this knight? So the knight actually went back. Black's equal here. It doesn't matter about d7. This is very interesting that it doesn't matter about d7. So takes, check. Now if king b1, then rook d8 is embarrassing the rook. That's just losing an entire rook. So actually white had to go in a pin here. If queen d2, then queen takes h5. Apparently this is slightly better for black. We've got potential outside pass pawn here, potential good square on c5. So white actually played rook d2. Now we have rook d8, queen g4. So for the moment, it looks as though is this an ugly pawn to take? Well, Magnus takes it. He's equal on pawns now. Queen g5 takes the queens off. So we've got this endgame. So I mean, these are quality, blitz games. There's been no significant blunder from either side so far. And the position here at move 26 is dead equal. So Peter Svidler has done really well so far against his slightly higher rated opponent. Rook g8, f4 supporting the knight, and also protecting the g-pawn in case of h6. We've got this g-pawn protected. Now h4 starts to put a little bit of pressure though, restraining the g-pawn and offering h7. So an interesting move here. Should this h7 pawn be taken? According to the engines here, the engine Houdini, knight e6 is a good move in this position. Knight e6, and then to follow up with maybe b3 and f5. It looks as though the f pawn might be significant, but knight takes h7 looks tempting. But here now, this f pawn can be blockaded. So is this a fine positional pawn sacrifice, or what? Well, knight e7. There's a nice blockade on f5 coming up. So white's starting to get a bit tied down. Rook f2, knight f5. You might think he shouldn't really lose this, and the engine suggests white's doing well. So knight g5, rook d8 now is played, and we've got this idea now of knight e3 for rook d1 mate, as well as hitting c4. So it's starting to be a little bit dangerous. White takes a precaution against the c pawn by playing b3. So still white's okay. Rook d3. And it introduces the idea here that maybe rook g3 is useful and a5 could lock down these pawns. Knight f3. Now rook e3 is played. So this is like a Magnus grind on 5-minute chess. He's a pawn down here. Maybe you wouldn't expect white to lose this, but you know, obviously time pressure in Blitz. So king d2, rook e4. Still, white's just a pawn up at the moment. Knight g5. The rook goes back. Trying to encourage maybe a repetition, but now we see rook f3. Rook drops back to e7. It's difficult with this blockade though to make progress with these two pawns. Rook d3 was played here, and now you know, restraints on this side of the board, a5. So you can see Magnus is targeting, you know, trying to lock down pawns on both sides of the board. And here white actually plays a move which is still okay. Rook d5. So hitting the knight. Knight e3. And I must assume that Petrosian lost on time. This isn't so critical to lose g2 actually, or the h-pawn, because white actually has a resource here. Just rook e5, and it's far from clear now. It's engine suggests white's actually doing very well here. We're talking plus 1.6 with rook e5. So I suspect Petrosian lost on time, unless anyone can tell me what happened here. Sorry, I guess I should know 100%. I'm not really sure 100% what happened here. Did Petrosian lose on time? Because it just seems rook e5 is okay. If g2 is lost, I mean, it's not the end of the world even if we lose g2. If rook d8, you know, knight takes here, f5 is dangerous. You know, this f pawn, this will be guiding the f pawn. So yeah, I just think maybe white lost on time. Okay, so possibly not the most amazing 5-minute game from Magnus, but maybe, you know, he's getting in the event. Or yeah, it's time pressure is obviously part of Blitz chess, but it was nevertheless, I thought it was quite interesting anyway. Black's positional pawn sacrifice, and getting a lockdown on both sides. But yeah, it looks as though with the technical move rook e5, this stuff doesn't mean so much. White's going to force through f5. If the rook, say, moves here, well, we can take the knight. So we, in fact, it's virtually forced to. The only other move here is knight f1 check. Okay, we can do this. Knight g3, rook d7. But here, white's going to be better with knight f3. Alright, so yeah, that was unfortunate for Petrosian. So rook d5 does seem like one of the best moves, in fact. Okay, so that's what happened there. A bit of luck then for Magnus in that game. Let's go on to see Sergei Karyakin as white against Magnus. So e4, e5. After knight f3, knight c6, we have bishop b5, Roy Lopez. And this seems really cheeky, this next move. I'm wondering what's happened to my game score actually. I'm pretty sure this is a weird move. Absolutely weird. Apparently it is in live book as 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The 9th option, bishop b4. The 9th most popular option, bishop b4. I guess the idea is quite cheeky, just to get the bishop round like this. It's a nice diagonal. Bishop b4, but it seems to be encouraging white to construct the classical centre. So c3, bishop a5, white castles. Knight ge7, d4. Magnus takes. So white's got the classic centre. So maybe Karyakin's quite pleased so far. d5. White plays e5 here. Okay, it gives black that f5 square though. That might be useful at some point in the future. For the moment, bishop g4 is played. h3. Bishop drops back. Knight c3. Black castles. White lashes out here. Maybe this looks a little bit unnecessary violence in this position. The engine is just dropping the bishop back here, or bishop e3. We see this move to g4 with a drop in evaluation. Funny enough, it seems a bit odd. Bishop drops to g6, knight h4. Very aggressive looking idea. Bishop b6, it seems entirely logical to target d4 here. Bishop e3. Now Magnus again attacks white's spearhead pawn in this game with f6. So this helps guarantee black some play on the f file after e takes, rook takes. So now if black could continue with something like queen d6, it looks quite good. Maybe it's double rooks. Knight takes g6 was played. After this, black's fully equalized actually. The engine suggests actually taking on c6 is a good move. What about bishop e2, you might argue here? I think this is already, this is very comfortable for black, this position. No, doubling rooks, I mean, sorry. That's very comfortable for black. But apparently in this position, bishop takes c6, maybe to do with undermining e5. Or here, if knight takes, there's bishop g5. So it's actually to do with more like this. This position should be okay for white. So anyway, white actually took on g6 after knight takes g6. For me, it looks as though this is quite frightening. You might think, well, what is this about bishop g5 here? If bishop g5, black has got a very powerful move apparently in this position. If this was played, it wasn't played in the game. Actually, queen b3 was played. So Magnus offers this. It seems, you know, skewer, but can you see what black can do here rather simply? So what would black play in this position? If you were black in this position, would you be worried about this? What would you play here? Any ideas? I mean, would you think you've got enough compensation? Maybe I should rearrange this question. Has black got enough compensation for letting this go after knight takes d4? The engine seems to suggest black does. If you look at white's weakened king side, say takes, this is intriguing actually. Well, if we take with the queen here, this is like allowing knight takes d5. It might actually be better to take with the g pawn, and then we can look forward to queen d6. Let's just follow this through as an example. If rook e1, just as an example, queen d6, we've got some very, very serious threats on white's king here for the exchange. I don't know what we can play for white actually. Say rook c1, c6, if the bishop moved back, like for example this. So I think there's a lot of compensation. The way Magnus has played this, allowing this bishop g5, it seems this is quite ingenious as a positional sacrifice invitation. This just looks too strong. Yeah, if black's got this plan on h2, it looks too strong. So anyway, white played queen b3, and black's now technically better. We see now knight ce7. So this not only reinforces d5, gets away from this, but prepares also stuff like this now. Knight e4, using the pin. If bishop g5 here. We can just drop back. We can take with the queen here. There's no problem with d5, and black's going to be playing c6 soon. So knight e4, rook f8. White lashes out now. Well, black is potentially threatening knight f4 now. So white stamps that out with f4. Now we see c6. So that makes way for bishop c7 potentially. Bishop d3. King h8 unpinning. So now pawn takes is threatened. Knight c5. Threatening knight e6. Queen d6. Not minding, it seems, about b7. Let's just have a quick check here. If knight takes on b7, Magnus could play queen c7. Apparently this is okay. If knight c5, we can just take on f4 here. So anyway, so in this position, white actually took on g6. Knight takes g6. So we've got knight pressure on f4. Look, you can see that white's fundamentally compromised his king. I guess what we have witnessed is an instantaneous reaction in a blitz game for a positional sacrifice based on g4. That kind of lit up positional sacrifices for Magnus. And white does seem compromised here already. Black is better. In fact, okay, knight takes b7 in this position. Let's examine it. Queen b8. We can just take on f4 again. The f4 is a big problem. So knight d3 protecting f4 a bit more. Rook a e8. Now knight e5. Does this solve white's problems? Not really. There's a little tactic now Magnus plays. Knight takes f4. That bishop, that knight is loose here. So if bishop takes, well, bishop takes d4, in fact, just picks up the piece with advantage. If rook takes, again, we're just playing bishop takes d4 and we're picking up the piece. So knight takes f4, little tactic. So white's just lost the pawn, ouch. And h3 is under fire. That's here white plays king h1. If knight takes here, it looks as though knight f7 check might be useful. No, apparently that's not even working. Just taking bishop c7 is good for black here. So that's not even working. But so Magnus actually played knight g6, which is actually stronger than knight takes h3 apparently. This is Houdini's top move, knight g6. So just challenging that knight. And you might think, well, knight f7 check here. Again, we just take that and bishop c7 again. Threatening mate. How does white defend that? If bishop g1, rook e2 is just all over. It's too much. White has to just give up the exchange and is really compromised. So that's much better for black. So after knight g6, well, actually this was the game continuation. Knight f7 check, that was taken. So as mentioned, bishop c7 looks strong. Very strong, in fact. Probably the strongest move. Magnus actually didn't play this. He played actually queen e6. That looks good as well, hitting the rook and bishop. So in this position, it would be a disaster to play rook f3 because of knight h4. If here, then we've got all sorts of things. We've got bishop c7 or queen e4. So white plays actually the much better move, rook a f1. And yeah, that might be a major inaccuracy, this queen e6 business. Technically, in this position, it's actually 0.00 according to my engine here. It's as though, practically, yes, there's a bit of air around the king, but this other continuation forcing white to lose the exchange, whoops, was better apparently. But anyway, h5 trying to rip open the king. Bishop g1 takes, and now white played queen g3, so white's still doing very nicely. Now, yeah, this has gone wrong actually for Magnus quite badly. White's actually in the driving seat technically, and has also taken away this c7 square. G takes, rook takes b7. The rooks are now going to coordinate on the 7th rank. Magnus plays king g8. Things are getting a little bit worse now. Rook f7. Maybe even stronger. There's other ideas, but let's go with this. Check. King h2. And yeah, this is getting extremely dangerous. We see check, bishop f2. In this position now, after this queen e2 check, which took away protection from g6, you see that protection from g6. Technically here, after bishop takes d4, it looks really scary to pick up this knight in this position. Queen takes g6 looks kind of scary because you've got rook, bishop and queen here. And literally it looks quite terrifying. But apparently in this position it might be the very best thing to do to take that knight. In the game there's instead quick, and we'll have a look at this, king takes h3 was played, and here maybe, well, white resigned with this move. Black is winning anyway in this position, even if he lost on time or whatever, because check would force this, and now rook e2, and the bishop covers g7, and this is just terrible for white. Knight h4 check, maybe it's threatened. It's actually terrible for white. Let's give an example. Queen d3, bishop takes. If takes, king h8, check. Black can munch this stuff. And we've got this knight f4 at the end here. So we've got 3 pieces against the queen here, and this black's actually doing very well. So it seems king takes h3 was a disaster move. On queen takes g6, which looks terrifying, I challenge anyone to find a win here, actually. It seems as though this is not very good for black. If we go with bishop e5 check, takes, check, either king g4, believe it or not, or king h4, or even, I think even simpler might be queen g2. White's just in the clear here. White's in safety. So yeah, a horrific blunder. Magnus didn't need to play this queen e2 check. I mean, he made things a lot worse. Apparently bishop takes d4. Yeah, but queen e2 check, this is actually just technically a lost position if white had played queen takes g6. I don't know if that surprises anyone. Does it surprise anyone? Anyone surprised? Queen takes g6 does seem to be totally winning. Well, it's just Blitz. We looked at bishop e5. If queen takes f2, yeah, this looks like a very important one to consider. Well, rook takes f2. No, not very important. No, what else is there? I can't see anything else. Yeah, a bit lucky there then. Magnus was a bit lucky. His opponent finally stumbled with a horrific blunder by playing king takes h3 in this position. It's a horrific blunder instead of queen takes g6. This is what time constraints do to chess. So let's look at another game anyway. So okay, bit lucky there, perhaps you could argue, but a good player creates his own luck, as Capablanca says. So Magnus Carlsen against Ajstein, fellow Norwegian. So playing with the white pieces, e4, and Ajstein played the Sicilian defense, knight f3, e6, open Sicilian, a6. Now in this position the most common move is actually to play bishop d3. Now knight f6, this is quite common. White usually castles here, but queen e2 was played by Magnus instead. e5, knight f5, knight c6, white castles, g6, knight e3. So from the opening it looks as though this is promising for white for d5 control. Bishop g7, knight c3, so d5 looks like a nice square. Off the castles, knight e d5. Yeah, white's doing quite well here, technically, against his fellow Norwegian grandmaster Ajstein. Well, I think it's also been his coach as well for a long time. Knight takes d5, knight takes d5, d6, bishop e3. It looks as though bishop e6 could be handy. Bishop e6. In this position, bishop c4, trying to reinforce that d5 control. b5. Bishop drops back. Now here black commits to accepting a kind of compromised pawn structure with knight d4. So he's going to have these double pawns if white takes, which he does. Is there anything better to suggest here? The engine mentions queen b8, but it does mention knight d4 as well. So knight d4, that's taken, e takes. So a nice grip on d5, a4, bishop d7. White doesn't mind taking on b5 here. If bishop takes b5, we've got bishop c4 as a defense to that skewer, and white should be okay here. Also the a6 looks a bit vulnerable. So a takes b5 was played. White took on a8, queen takes, knight b6, not minding getting rid of that lovely knight for this fork here to take on d7. And we have opposite coloured bishops, of course, which you might think is a surprising decision there from Magnus. Why would he want opposite coloured bishops here? Well, concretely, black's pawns, well, not concretely, more abstractly, black's pawns look shattered in the long run, and d5 looks quite nice for that bishop, controlling a8. So basically we've got control of the a file because we've got the a8 square, which black can't parry the a file here. So maybe it looks as though this black's low in counterplay. Black played h5, so maybe trying to do something naughty on the king side later. But also this kind of stuff could be useful. Rook a1, rook b8, g3, bishop f6 actually was played, so maybe h4. It looks as though it could be quite dangerous in theory. Rook a6. Now with that d6 looked on, something like this, and this is interesting as well. b4 drops the c4 square in one go though. b4, bit committal. If black didn't play b4, maybe king g7 or h4 is being suggested here. King g7 or h4. I think white's still got a nice position. It's got a nice grip on the position. So anyway, b4 slightly loosens squares. So queen c4 immediately is used with pressure on f7. King g7, rook c6, now threatening rook c7, bishop d8, controlling the c7 square, b3 locking down the pawn here, queen a7, drops the d6 pawn. Now you might think, oh hold on, why did black have to drop the d6 pawn? What can black do here? White's last move basically prepared queen. It looks as though it's preparing queen takes d4 check without bishop f6. If we played queen takes d4 here, bishop f6, this is still bad for black. Is this even playable? No, it's terrible. That's still bad for black. But anyway, it seems to be safeguarding this. So d4, black can't actually defend this without rook c7. So that's why black's in a bad shape here. Plays queen a7, just offering d6 instead of d4. So that's taken. And white now is dominating the position really. Bishop b6. Okay, there might be a problem. This is dealt with. King g2. So no d3s here. Rook d8. And here it seems as though either black might have resigned with his move or lost on time. White is significantly better. White's actually winning a second pawn now. So black might have resigned here. Rook takes d8, wins a second pawn. We can take this pawn freely, I think. And yeah, maybe black's got no real counterplay in this position. Even though it's opposite coloured bishops, you might think that offers something, but I'm not sure it does actually. White's going to just carry on improving the position, should be able to grind this out. So anyway, yeah, so there was no luck in that one anyway. That was a grind. Even accepting the opposite coloured bishops, which you might think from earlier was an interesting decision. If we have a look at that knight d5 decision, sorry, the knight leaving d5 in this position, I wonder how many of us would do this. Knight b6, giving up the beautiful knight, but the position is so strong after bishop d5. So yeah, and black's structure is really compromised, of course. So that was quite a smooth game compared to the other two we've just seen. Okay, so now this is a bit of a grind against Anish Giri. Let's have a look at this. And Giri is, I think, really good with the Grunfeld defense. So Magnus Carlsen against Anish Giri. Oh, by the way, let me just check something on stream. What's happening here on stream? Now, are we back there? Sorry about that. I just wanted to check. I hope nothing. I hope you were able to hear all that. So, against Anish Giri, d4, knight f6, and we do get this Grunfeld. So c4, g6, knight c3. So quite theoretical. d5, knight f3, bishop g7. I think this is called the Russian system. And I used to play this. I did an article on it actually ages ago. Queen b3. So white, even though he's using his queen, is trying to encourage black to release the tension in the center. So d takes c4, queen takes c4. Very topical. After castling e4. Livebook suggests the main move here, which is played, which is a6. This is apparently the main move. Another idea is knight a6 or bishop g4. a6 the main move. Most popular here apparently is e5. Magnus chooses bishop e2, the second most popular. b5. and the queen actually drops back here to d3. I think this has a special significance. I've only got 6 games in my live book for queen d3 and 294 for queen b3. I seem to remember on the channel, I'm pretty sure we saw Magnus losing quite quickly to Giri once in the Groomfield. It all came down to some wrong queen move. This looks like much rarer what Magnus has played here than queen b3, this queen d3. But I don't think there's any big problem with it. It doesn't seem, the engine's not suggesting it's losing or anything. Bishop b7 apparently is the main move here. You can imagine b4 being dangerous for e4. If we have a quick look at that, bishop b7, what would white do? Maybe just e5 here. This should be okay. So Anish actually played c5 in this position, and white now was able to take here. His queen's protected by the bishop, of course. Bishop b7, bishop e3, holding on to that pawn. b4, and you might think, is knight d5 playable here? Well, I don't think it's very good compared to what was played. In fact, black can simply just take on d5, and this should be okay. These bishops look quite good. Black's doing well here. Magnus actually played what seems to be more technical, knight a4, so the knight's going to come to b6. So it's offering e4 two ways. If we take with this bishop here, white can play this, queen takes, and castle here, and white should be okay. White's got a nice position here with ideas like this. So black actually played, after knight a4, knight takes e4, and the queen dropped back. Bishop c6, and the knight went to b6. White's doing nicely in this position. Now castled, knight d7. That's pinned for the moment, unpinned. Now c5 is even more reinforced. And here the engine suggests white's almost up by +2, which is quite significant. It looks as though black didn't do anything too badly wrong, except for the slightly adventurous, what seemed to be temporary, pawn sack idea, c5, which was usually kind of thematic in Groomfields. But it seems white is doing much better than you'd think. I guess this rook doesn't inspire confidence. This d-file, everything's well placed here in white's position. In fact, knight d4 is pretty menacing to try and get this pawn going, hitting c6. So black actually stopped knight d4, among other things, by playing e5. But he's now weakening the d5 square. And he's also weakened d6 as well. Very committal move. Sorry, I'm going to have to say this. Sorry, I was just before coming. I was just watching this program about cats. You see this e5? Pawns can't go backwards. Did you know that cats, they get stuck up trees because they can't come down? It's committal, isn't it? When you move a pawn forward, you can't move it back. d6 is now fatally compromised. Like the cats stuck up the tree, they can't climb back down. So knight c4 goes into the d6 square. I don't know why that came into my head. I thought I'd mention it as a way of remembering pawns can't go backwards, like cats can't climb back down trees. So you get these firemen kind of trying to rescue these cats all the time, apparently. There was a program about it. Anyway, sorry. Rook c7. Okay, rook c7 was played. So d6 has been fatally compromised. Knight d6, positionally, from a positional perspective. Queen a8. Okay, now white in this position plays I'm sorry. Queen b3. I don't know what got over me now. Oh dear. Queen b3. Yeah, so b4 is on fire. The knight's looking at f7, tying down an entire rook now as well. So black gets fed up with that knight on d6. He plays knight takes d6. So giving white what seems to be a very dangerous pawn here. C takes d6, but it's blockaded for the moment. Rook c8. So white now snaps off this pawn. So yeah, Giri's been positionally done over in his favourite Grunfeld. Rook b8, queen a3. Now black volunteers the light squared bishop. What is white actually threatening? Well, white can build up here with maybe rook d2 and then go on to that c file later. So he actually gave up the light squared bishop, which the engine suggests is a reasonable try here. Takes. Now, actually, you might think bishop takes. That looks playable, but Magnus keeps the scrutiny on a6 here. So g takes looks a bit ugly, but a6, I guess, or just coming in with rook c7. Just the bishop is okay here. So anyway, e4. Now after e4, queen takes a6 seems playable, but actually bishop d4 was played, trying to weaken black's king. Bishop takes d4. Rook takes d4. Yep, black's getting done over. For the moment, the pawn is blockaded. How do we unblockade this? Well, e takes f3, bishop takes f3, queen a7, hitting the rook. The rook drops back. It looks as though rook c7 is the major threat now. Rook fc8 parries that. White takes on c8, rook takes. Another way to hit the knight is like this. So rook e1, that also looks good for f7 as well. Queen d4. Now in this position, it looks as though rook c2 could be useful on f2. Magnus plays king g2 here. That's interesting. If we look at rook e7, which looks like a move, actually knight e5 is even better. Is even better than rook c2. Knight e5 hits the bishop, and this could be unpleasant for white potentially. If king g2, rook c2, it's a total disaster for white. So Magnus's king g2 here looks important. In this position, if knight e5 is played here, oh, this is beautiful. Oh, that is beautiful prophylaxis. Can you see the move white? What could white play in this position? Apparently, it's really technically crushing. What would you play here if knight e5 was played? Any ideas? So why isn't this good here, knight e5? Any ideas? Apparently this is really murderous for black, rook e4. So knight takes a3 is not checked. So the queen, if the queen moves to d5, now we can play d7. And if rook d8, queen e7, black's falling apart. He's losing a piece, for example. He's just losing e5, for example. So king g2, fantastic prophylaxis. Maybe a lot of us wouldn't play that with that idea, but that does seem to be avoiding this, you know, these dangerous moves like knight e5. I think in the main events, I think it was Giri that scored in the main event with you know, an F2 disaster of some sort. You see Magnus even in the Blitz game, he's doing prophylaxis against this sort of thing. It was in Grizchuk, I think, lost in the first round to Giri with some sort of tactic on F2. So I just thought it's worth mentioning this. King G2 looks it's actually quite impressive prophylaxis, I think. So Rook C5, this looks dangerous though, swinging the rook like this. In this position, Rook E4 is used in this position. So what happens if Rook G5 check? Here, apparently, King F1 is the move. And again, black hasn't got a major attack of any sort here. Black's being pushed back, so say Queen B6, check, check. Black's going to be worse. Rook E5, and white's getting rid of black's counterplay. Still with that huge d-pawn asset. So that wasn't even tried. We see actually in this position, Queen takes d6. White's lost his pride pawn though, and apparently it's equal here. So I don't know, was this messed up? Just one moment. In this position, yeah, maybe better was just Queen E3. Queen E3. Let's see what's happening here. Queen takes Rook D1. This is interesting from an engine point of view. That looks pretty dangerous. If F5, we've got Queen E6. So anyway, yeah, the d-pawn was lost. That seems a bit sad actually. So the d-pawn was lost here. So Rook E4, Queen takes D6. Queen E3. Well, at least though, it looks as though Rook E8 or Rook D4 is still useful. Knight F6. Rook D4. White's still got the 2-to-1 pawn majority. He's controlling the G5 square, so it's still slightly advantage for white now. Queen C7, B4. Yeah, this is not. This is quite a grind actually. We're on move 35 now. So a blitz game. Are we really going to see a 2-to-1 pawn majority? Or bishop versus knight, but slightly weakened king here. Is this really convertible? Well, let's see what happens. Rook C2, A4, King G7, H3, H5, B5. So single pass pawn now. Queen C5. The pawn is protected. Bishop C6, Rook C3, Rook D3. We get an exchange of queens after this. So this simplifies drastically. Did black have to do that? Engine suggests Rook B2, and it looks like a small advantage for white. It's going to be difficult to break black down. But anyway, so this simplifies. Queen's off. Rook B3 getting behind the pawn. G5. The pawn can't be pushed at the moment because the knight's got D7. If B6 we just take, and then we've got knight D7. So we see bishop A8. Now the pawn can be pushed. Rook C8, bishop C6. G4, white takes, King F1. King F8, bishop G2. Knight D7, B6. It looks as though the pawn's impressive here. King comes in. Check. Okay, king walks over here, hitting this pawn now. Check. And Magnus has massively improved his position over the last few moves. He plays this for a moment, and now Rook D5 check here. Rook A5 threatens things like this. Rook A8 is really annoying. Bishop E4 stops any F5. F6, King F4, king e6. Now rook a8. Black's totally tied down now after knight d7. Is losing by force. Bishop f5 check. King d6. White just takes on d7. And black resigned here. Or I think I've got king d5, which is nonsense. I think black just resigned here. So yeah, so that was converted. We just flip that back for a moment to this position with which would seem quite complicated for most people in a 5-minute game. So why was that so easy from here? Queen c5. White's actually think rook f4 and queen d4 hits both sides of the board. Maybe that's if black didn't play queen c5. We go like this. Rook f4. Where's this knight going? It's b6. Yeah, it looks as though queen c5 might have been prompted by something like this. Rook f4 and queen d4 looks strong. I think black is slightly weak on the dark squares and that extra pawn. So this doesn't look as though black wanted to get the queens off. Now white was improving dramatically. This pawn is potentially weak all the time as well. So the king just gets to munch the pawn almost. Yeah. Yeah, just domination of the knight and rook. So that was a fine positional performance for a Blitz game. Okay, Topalov against Magnus Carlsen. So Magnus was playing black against Topalov. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and Topalov plays a very interesting move here from live book. This is about 4, 5, 6. About the 8th most popular move is g3. Avoids the theory. Knight f6 for Magnus. Looks like a natural move here. d3. d5 has been played quite a lot. Magnus plays bishop c5, also popular. Doesn't seem like anything spectacular from the opening. c3. Both sides castle. a6 leaves the bishop to come back to a7 if needed. Rook e1. Bishop drops back immediately. Knight a3. Knight e7. This looks nice to get the knight over here. It means once e5 is supported, maybe also like this as well. Knight c2, knight g6. h3. Rook e8. Bishop e3, and now black does play c6, not minding the rook being displaced a little bit. Bishop takes, rook takes, knight e3. Magnus plays for d5. Queen c2. The idea is not to play d4 though immediately or anything. Just bishop e6 for a moment. Rook 81. Rook drops back. Knight g5. In this position though now d4 is more tempting, it seems. Magnus was tempted to play d4 here, giving up the light squared bishop. Just check this out for a moment. Rook a8, knight g5. The engine actually suggested putting the bishop somewhere, preserving the bishop. This is interesting. d4, giving up the bishop. Rook takes. And white played knight f5 here. c5. So if this bishop can be kept shut down, I guess, then these knights will be quite good. h4. Knight f8. Bishop h3. The rook uses c6 now. And black apparently is equal here. Even though he's given up that bishop voluntarily, the space advantage for black seems quite good. f4. This is a weakening move. I mean, it looks... You'd think it sort of weakens white's king intuitively, and there might be some concrete justification, but as soon as this move is played, the engine evaluation drops, like in previous game we've seen. So what is it about these moves? I mean, they just encourage things like positional sacrifices and all sorts to try and use the vacuum of squares. Magnus just takes on f4. You notice h4 is potentially a bit more vulnerable here. Knight h5, f4 is attacked immediately, but also we've got queen on h4 if it wasn't for the knight. Rook f1, knight g6 hitting h4. So yeah, it looks as though that was an ambitious idea, but black apparently is in the driving seat now with a clear advantage. So just before we go on from this, just quickly check, did white have to play f4? Queen d2, I think it just holds the balance apparently. Apparently this holds the balance if white doesn't play f4. Apparently it's about equal. So yeah, courageous to have these weak pawns. So knight takes h4, Magnus actually snaps off a pawn. Knight takes, queen takes. It's actually really quite miserable here if white hasn't got a clear attack. He's just lost that pawn, and black has got all sorts of nasty things. He's even got this rook coming into all these squares. So bishop f5 takes away g6. Check. Rook d8. Rook f3. Magnus just takes the queens off, kicks the bishop. Bishop g4. Knight f6. Hits the bishop. This is unfortunate actually. If the bishop had gone to h3, this might be slightly better. For the reason we're about to see. Bishop h3, it's still better for black with rook f6. This is nasty. This position is much better for black. We've got this f4 square. So anyway, it's a miserable position already, but this doesn't help. After knight f6, we see now d takes c3, and the point is, can you guess what black plays in this position? If I give you 20 seconds starting from now. Black to play. Anyone? Black to play here. Yeah. I hope most of you have the position by now. So black to play here. Knight takes e4. Yeah, just winning another pawn. Oh dear, so much for f4 just a few moves ago. Yeah, it seems as though if you ever play Magnus Carlsen, don't try and play moves like f4 or g4 unless you really value your king safety, etc. So rook c1, knight f6, 2 pawns up, rook cd6, and white resigns here actually without playing on. White just resigns here. 2 pawns up. If white plays rook d1, if white did play on with rook d1, actually knight d5 hits everything as well. Oh, I'm gonna lose another pawn here. Yeah, so that wouldn't be too pleasant. Okay, yeah, I thought it would be interesting to have a look at these Blitz games. So some of them, the early ones we saw, Magnus seemed to be a bit lucky in at least a couple, but on the other hand, there's about 4 of them which seem to be positional grinds, masterpieces. I think about 2 or 3 of them, his opponents self-destructed with aggressive-looking pawn moves on the king side. So maybe you got something from this. I hope you did. Comments or questions on YouTube. And see you next Tuesday at the more usual time. It's only because I had a Blitz tournament myself yesterday that I rescheduled for today. Okay, hope you enjoyed that. Comments or questions on YouTube again. Okay, thanks very much. See you next week.